Hey everyone, it's Bradley Bush with another algebra video for you. Today we are talking about absolute value. And if this is your first time to my channel, thank you so much for coming. If you're returning, thanks for coming back. If you like what you see here, please consider subscribing and giving me a like or leaving a comment. So what is absolute value? The short answer is absolute value is just the distance between two values on the real number line. So really, absolute value just came about because it was a measure of distance. They needed to figure out how to measure something, and absolute value is the great way to do it, right? So let me explain what I mean. So the definition of the absolute value we have here. So the absolute value of x is just itself if it's positive, and it's negative of itself if the original is negative. So if we have absolute value of -5, since what we have underneath here in the absolute value sign is negative, we're in the second category, and we take the negative of it. So what's the negative of -5? Well, that's just +5. Or in other words, it just makes everything that is positive in there, or everything that's negative in there, become positive. So how does that tell you distance? It's not, I mean, is it super intuitive to you? I don't think it's super intuitive. But once I explain it, you're going to be like, yeah, sure, that's totally distance. So if we think of this as the absolute value of -5 is really asking you how far is -5 from 0. If we look at -5, we find -5. Where's -5 on the number line? -5 is right here on the number line. How many units is it from 0? 0's here. -5 is here. That's 5 units if we just counted them, right? Let's count. Here we have 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, 5 units. It's 5 units away from 0. So that's why the answer to the question absolute value of -5 is +5, because it's a distance. 5 units from 0. That's what it's telling you. If we had, for example, the absolute value of +3, well, that just stays positive because we're just, again, looking for distance. That's all we're looking for. So where is +3? Let me mark it. +3 is right here, and 0 is here. So how far is +3 from 0? How many units? 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units. It's 3 units. That's why the absolute value of 3 is +3. Kind of cool, huh? I think it's kind of cool to see the backstory. So now you know to see the big picture. Let's actually do some computation here. And let's pick a color. It's always hard to pick a color. I know it seems like it shouldn't be so hard, but it is. I'm telling you, it's hard to pick a color. The absolute value of -4, using our rules here, that's just +4. Because we know -4 is 4 units from 0. How about 6 minus pi? Well, what is pi? Pi, just FYI, is that transcendental number that's like 3.14 and then blah, 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 keep going on forever. So which is bigger, 6 or 3.14, blah, blah, blah? 6 is, obviously. So when we rewrite this as absolute value, we could just say in our calculator 6 minus pi, and we would get a number. We'd get 2.95 or 6, blah, 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 so on. But we could just leave it as it is, but make sure that when we rewrite it, we get the negative right. So if we wrote pi here, -6, notice the negative is, the 6 is negative, and since 3.14 is smaller than the 6, the result is going to be negative, so we wouldn't want to do that. We could just say 6 minus pi, and then we could drop the absolute values, because when we actually figure this out, here, we would get an answer. If we did 6 minus pi, we'd get 2.8, 5.8, and so on. That's funny. That 5 kind of looks like an 8, doesn't it? But if we wanted to just rewrite this b without the absolute values, then we could just write 6 minus pi and we'd be good. How about c? Let's take care of the absolute value first. So we have -2 and the absolute value of -4 is +4. So that gives us -1/2. D, here we have so many absolute values that I had to color them different colors because I couldn't keep them all straight. So we have the absolute value of 3. Here we have the absolute value of -7, the absolute value of -3, the absolute value of -7, and then all of that has an absolute value on the outside. So let's take care of the absolute value of -3 first. This gives us, we have the absolute value hanging out still, but now we have +3, and we have that minus, and then the absolute value of -7 is +7. And what's 3 minus 7? That gives me -4. What's the absolute value of -4? +4. And we're done. Let's talk about some properties of absolute values. So a and b are real numbers, and in number 5, b can equal 0, but we'll get there in a second. So the first property of absolute values is that the absolute value of a number is always positive or equal to 0. And you might think that's arbitrary, like why do they have that? Where does it come from? Well, if you think back to the measurement or the distance conception of absolute value, have you ever taken a tape measure and measured out a length, and that length was like -5 feet or negative anything? No, because you don't have negative numbers on a tape measure because distance is positive. You could have 0 distance, that means there isn't any length there, right? So 0 is a valid number, but you can't have anything negative. So that's the first rule. So as an example here, we have the absolute value of -5 is 5, which is greater than or equal to 0. And the second rule is really part of the definition that we've discussed already. And we have a quick example. Absolute value of -2 is +2, but I think you're probably good at that. How about this next one, number 3? A is always less than or equal to the absolute value of A. So let's say -3 is going to be less than or equal to the absolute value of -3. Because remember, the absolute value is always positive or 0. So if we take the absolute value of -3, we get 3. And does it hold? It does, because -3 is less than or equal to +3. So that's true. Perfect. Number 4, the absolute value of A times B equals the absolute value of A and the absolute value of B separate multiplied together. So you can split them apart and you can either multiply them first, as you have on the left, and then take the absolute value second, or on the right you have the absolute value being taken first and then multiplied together second. And this rule says that it doesn't matter which way you do it, you still get the same answer. So if we have -2 times 3, if we multiply that together, we get -6. The absolute value of -6 is +6. So we multiplied first, took the absolute value second. The next one, if we do it the other way around, we take their absolute values first. So absolute value of -2 is +2. The absolute value of 3 is +3. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 equals 6, true statement. So that one's also good. Number 5, the same thing applies when we're taking a quotient. If we can either take the quotient or divide A and B first and then take the absolute value, or we can take the absolute value first, which is what you're doing on the right, and then dividing second. And by the way, B can equal 0 or the world explodes. So let's do an example here. So we have 2 over -3, and we're taking the absolute value of that. Well, if we took the absolute value of 2 over 3 first, then we would get 2/3. If we split them up and took it separate, we'd get 2 in the top and 3 in the bottom, which is the same thing we got before. 2/3 equals 2/3. So that's a true property right there as well. And let's do the last one, number 6. This is sometimes called the triangle inequality. You might hear that. It's not super important to know that, but you might hear it, and this is what they're referring to. So it's saying that a plus b, the absolute value of a plus b, has to be less than or equal to the absolute value of a plus the absolute value of b. So notice before it was equal to, meaning up here in number 4, we were multiplying and the two sides were equal. Number 5, we were dividing, two sides were equal. But when we're adding, it doesn't quite hold. So when we're adding, it's no longer equal, it's less than or equal. So the left side has to be less than or equal to the right side. So let's check it out and see if that makes sense to us. We're looking on the left. If, say, we have a equals -5 and b is 4. I mean, where did 4 come from? 2. B is 2, so we have -5 plus 2. If we add those together, we get -3, and then absolute value of -3 is +3. So that's what we have on the left. So our inequality says that 3 has to be less than or equal to whatever is on the right. So let's separate them and do this process with them individually first. So take the absolute values of them individually and then add them together. We get the absolute value of -5, which is just +5, and the absolute value of 2, which is just 2, and 5 plus 2 is 7. That's pretty amazing. 3 is less than or equal to 7. True statement. Cool. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully it gives you a little bit of understanding about absolute value and their properties, and hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.